I'm one of those kids that grew up in a very religious family, surrounded by an intensely religious community that constantly echoed our own prejudices back at us. It's really not an uncommon childhood in Middle America, so it's funny how alone I felt. Remember, it took me years to fully realize the industrial decay all around me that this zealotry plastered over. My childhood home was situated what a sociologist or economist might call the suburbs, but nobody there had the means to fulfill such a promise. The most interesting thing going for it was a half-hour drive to the megachurch in a more affluent neighborhood, a drive my parents and I made every weekend. It's quite the strange picture to imagine us driving in the early morning, sunlight peeking through the gap of a giant door, while the silhouettes of an abandoned silo and rusting textiles littered the landscape. Have you ever been to a megachurch? I find that most of my friends couldn't recognize one if we drove right past it, let alone detail its inner workings. Putting it simply, it's a pyramid scheme with weekly seminars built in, alongside a handful of holidays. I'm sure that people get something out of these places, though I can't say it's worth it, because the cost certainly outweighs your gains. Sometimes I wonder if it's unfair that this one particularly egregious stain drove me away from something with the variety of Christianity. My parents are still Christians. I partake in their little rituals when I visit, and there is a comfort in playing out these old habits. Then, these moments of agnostic self-doubt, that's when I remember him. The priest. When you would imagine a priest, what do you see in your mind's eye? Maybe a grandfatherly figure that clasps your hands to wish you a good day as you exit the church doors. Perhaps a stern and authoritative orator, preaching fire and brimstone from the pulpit. You might even imagine a heroic archetype. Someone like Father Karras from The Exorcist. The priest was like no other. Somehow he could be all three at once. The priest stood at center stage, more his natural habitat than whatever house he secreted away to, once prying eyes scattered. All were enraptured with the piercing blue of his sight. A chill ran down your back whenever he looked your way. Were it a contest between Christ himself and that man, I bet you every time that anyone in that room would have chosen the latter. He preached that the modern world was falling to sin, warning us all to check our pillows in the morning to prove we were not turning into pillars of salt. What sins were those? Potpourris of the general and specific, systemic and individual, largely tying back to the secular liberalism of the state and the blasphemy of homosexuals. His serenade made it easy to believe that such abstract concepts, at least abstract to my phenomenal perspective, were the cause of all our ills, and not the austerity behemoth right outside our doors. That voice wasn't the only weapon in his arsenal, though, as he always seemed particular to staging miracles. He'd browse his congregation until he found someone to cold read, revealing one of their lost loved ones at God's side, eliciting rapturous joy from the mark. Only once did he try this on someone in my family, my father, right after his estranged brother had died. Years later, I would learn that my uncle was gay and that he was shot at a convenience store a couple states away. I can't imagine what must have been going through my father's head as I saw those warm rivulets spill down his face. The priest also performed spirit healings, summoning the sick and vulnerable up to him so that he could float over their traitorous organs with his righteous and gnarled hands. If it were a disease of the mind, often dementia, he gently pushed them into a paralyzing euphoria, a stagehand always ready to catch them in a trustful. Someone couldn't walk or see or hear, they'd be overwhelmed with long-forgotten sensations, leaving their wheelchairs, sunglasses, or hearing aids at the wayside. These people I only ever saw once. Drifters with no friends or family in the different cliques of the church. No one could verify whether or not their miraculous recoveries took. The most esoteric and rare of these exhibitions, however, were his scalpelless surgeries. He'd lay someone down on a card table wheeled up to the stage, usually terrified due to the diagnosis of cancer that their meager health care wouldn't cover. The lights would dim as the priests felt up and down their torso, dowsing the location of the malignant flesh, carefully place his fingers inside of their body cavity. The subject never cried out in pain, so the process must have been somewhat intrusive, but you wouldn't notice. Their pupils dilate and the color drained from their face. After just a few minutes, the priest would turn around and produce a desiccated mound of flesh, as if he had pulled it from a jar in the pharaoh's tomb. No matter how far away you sat, it was easy to spot every individual tooth in his beaming smile, impossibly large yet somehow sticking to his face. These lucky few were active members of the community, and uniformly they had a second opinion that revealed their tumors to be benign. Some of them even kept the article of clothing they had on during the surgery, showing off the few spotches of dried blood where their cancer had been, like some badge of honor. The thing is, over the years, more and more of the people attending the church started developing tumors, multiple in cases of those already cured. The priest never explained why he only worked his magic for select people every few months, because dozens of lost lives should have otherwise been saved. Eventually the priest was gone without comment. A much more mundane man there to take his place, and no one but me seemed to notice a change. Sure, they knew there was a priest before the current one, yet none can say exactly when one left and the other arrived. The last time I prompted my parents for the answer, they both earnestly told me that it happened a decade before I was born. Alongside this, his name would never stay consistent, nor would his appearance. He could be white, black, Asian, with long hair or no hair. He might be remarkably short or tall. The only constants were that he was a man and that he had pale blue eyes. I'm 25 now, and it seems like every time I think about it seriously, that it's always been 5 years since I last saw the priest. That can't be the case. I moved out of my parents' house when I was 18. Still, I can picture it. Once again, captive in his audience. The hypnotized parents staring ahead, their skin a little grayer and missing hair and teeth. I know he's looking at me, but he's not on stage, just his huge, pulsating hands with knotted knuckles and too many fingers. They're ready to phase through the floor and pick something out of the earth, something incredibly dry and hidden away by God. That is where the memory stops, and my mind returns to the college class I should have been attending that day. Where will I be 5 years from now?